Welcome, CTA students, to a continuation of our expert webinar Q&A series. This topic is focused on consumption lounges. So far, the New Jersey CRC has endorsed more than 4 consumption lounges that can now operate in the Garden State. We interviewed the first 3 consumption lounge winners to learn how they navigated the approval process and what's next for their dispensaries as a possible new revenue stream opens up. Today's guest features include Spencer Belz, the COO of Tien Dispensary located in Atlantic City, John Cohn, CEO of Agromed Capital and an investor in High Rollers Dispensary located in Atlantic City, and Tom Rosensky, VP of Operations for Ginseng LLC in Merchantville. Now, we'll have each panelist introduce themselves.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Spencer Belz. I am the Chief Operating Officer of Tien Dispensary and Lounge in Atlantic City. We've been open since April 4th of 2024 and just recently got our consumption lounge open here in the city. And yeah, life's great.
Thank you, Spencer. I'll pass it to John.
How you doing? I'm John Cohn. I'm the founder and CEO of High Rollers Dispensary and Lounge, also in Atlantic City. We've actually been open since April 6th of 2024. So 2 days more recent than Tien, but yeah, also very happy to finally reach the milestone of having the lounge.
Congratulations. And last but certainly not least, Tom.
I'm Tom Rosensky. I'm the Vice President of Operations of Ginseng Dispensary in Merchantville, New Jersey. And we've been in operation since February 22nd of last year. So just passed, or just coming up on our 1.5-year anniversary. Pretty excited about that. And we've had our lounge open for a couple of weeks at this point.
And congratulations on reaching this milestone. We're going to talk about that process and that experience getting to this milestone. I'm sure a lot of people are interested in learning about everything you've had to go through. But before we get to the consumption lounge conversation, can you describe your experience and process in trying to go for the Class 5 retail in general? What did you learn about that application process and the licensing process? And then we'll start with Spencer with you.
Yeah, so I actually joined Tien after they had the license in hand. They had already gone through their conditional to annual conversion. But the consumption lounge was a part of their business model since day one. So when they originally got their resolution from the city of Atlantic City, it was a dual resolution for the dispensary and lounge. They received that back in 2022. So almost 3 years ago, but they knew from that point, from that first step that the lounge was a part of their business model as they went through the whole application process. As we know, the commission didn't put out the application for lounges separately until January 2nd of this year, but that was something that they had worked to, and built into all their SOPs since day one.
Awesome. Tom or John, would you like to give any insight on going for the Class 5 retail and your experience with that process?
Well, I've done it as well in Pennsylvania, so I have a little bit of experience in other states. I'd say that the multi-step process, conditional to conversion to annual, did kind of make things quite a bit easier, not having to get full site control up front. So to me, the conditional was kind of like a letter of intent, and then the conversions when really the pavement, rubber met the road. So I kind of like that aspect of how they did it. I guess like Spencer, when we applied in Atlantic City, we also day one had designed the lounge not only into the floor plan, site plan, and business plan, but did get municipal approval up front for it as well. But in terms of the Class 5 itself, it was a little bit longer process because it was 2 steps. And I'd say the one big difference is, and it's unfortunate in Jersey, you have this 30-day waiting period from the time that you receive your inspection until the time you could open. And that's different than I've experienced elsewhere. Typically, the inspector leaves, they sign the document, and you're operating 5 minutes later. So that was a little bit of an unknown kind of punch in the gut as we got there. But overall, I think that the licensing of the Class 5 went smooth.
Thank you, John. Tom, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Well, my experience was probably similar to John's. I was involved in applications in Pennsylvania for their medical round. I was also involved in an application in New Jersey for the second medical round that had the huge delay and COVID and everything in the middle of it. So that was, in comparison to the class 5 round, the class 5 round was very easy because the medical round was atrocious, and it was horrible. But I agree, the getting the conditional license is very easy, by any measure. There's a couple of SOPs, and mainly lining up the cast of characters. The annual conversion is quite a bit more difficult because that's where you have to actually get a site, and we were early on, but even at that point, beginning of 23, there weren't a lot of properties available, and we had to really hunt around for something that was suitable. And now it's even worse. Everything's been picked over, and we're starting to see a secondary market of a couple of dispensaries going out of business, and I assume that they'll be bought up by somebody. So it's at this point, I wouldn't envy somebody trying to get in and trying to find a location. There are some towns that are. I think there was a 2-year waiting period that if they were opted out, and that waiting period is expiring for towns. So maybe more towns will be coming online at this point and ease up the restrictions a little bit. But it's getting the location, getting a town approval. That's really and getting $1 million.
You mean $2 million? $1 million these days. That was last year's prices.
Yeah, exactly.
What are you talking about?
Other than that, it's a piece of cake.
Thank you, everybody. Let's go back to you, John. When you first heard about consumption lounges starting to the application opening and the endorsements, so to speak, can you talk a little bit about the conversation you were having with your partners or your team as you weighted around the inclusion of that in terms of, was it going to be cost effective? Was it going to be worth it? Can you talk a little bit about those conversations?
Yeah, well, and again, we actually had them early on when we were originally applying. The business plan was always sort of a question. We'd watch lounges sort of come about in some other states, but the business plan was never really very clear in terms of the ROI on the lounge. I think a big part of what we were doing, building high rollers in Atlantic City, trying to make it a destination, it fit very well with the business plan overall. And given Atlantic City has so many tourists and visitors, many of whom stay at casinos that don't really endorse cannabis consumption, it really made a lot of sense. For us, the struggle, it really was, well, how do you monetize it, and what is that business model, which we started formulating, really when we applied for our original dispensary license, but all based on very preliminary, almost no regs at all. There were some proposed regs, I believe, and then they did firm up the regs pretty early. Originally, I guess our biggest challenge was we built out the lounge when we built out our dispensary. So for us, it sat empty for 16 months. And that was the bigger discussion that I was having with my board and my investors on a quarterly basis, is like, you're paying rent, you put all the construction cost into the build, and there's no ROI. So that, that's a tough one to swallow, I guess, no matter who you are. But in terms of, we very much knew that we had to be agile, we had to be flexible, and we really had to wait to see what was going to come. The final regs were actually done over a year and a half ago. And they might have made 1 or 2 amendments. There's some qualifiers, which you can't even really find on the CRC website. You have to go elsewhere for them. But the process to get there is what the pain was, where the regs came out. It was told that applications were going to be coming out about a year before they actually did, in February. The revised regs, I believe, came out shortly before that, and the original applications came out in July of last year. And we went and applied right away and got slapped on the hand for applying too early. And not knowing what that meant, we turned around and applied again the next day, and got screamed at, told we'd be disqualified if we did it again. And so, well, what's the problem? And we're told that, well, the CRC approved the application process. They didn't approve the approval process for the applications. So they're on the website. You can fill them out. You can submit them, but, instant rejection. And then we were told we had to keep watching the bulletin to see when we could apply. And then Dispenser's Point, they did do the staggered applications for social equity, and then minority based, and then standards. So we were able to apply in April, I believe, when Spencer did. But for us, it was really a long time coming.
Yeah,
And
you were waiting. You were ready.
we were ready. And interestingly enough, they changed the application from July to April as well. So the app that I had filled out in April or in July, when I went back in, there were added questions and some removed. Well, it turns out the portal had some bugs at that time too. So any of the questions that were new, regardless of what we put in, never made it to the CRC. So we actually got rejected again for not filling out a complete app, even though it was complete. Now, that was just a website error, and it was rectified fairly quickly, but nevertheless caused a little bit of angst when said, well, what do you mean we don't have an emergency plan? It's like, it's right there, but they couldn't see it on
Angst
our.
and cannabis go together so
Yeah.
well, don't they?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it's supposed to relieve it in some cases, but I'll tell you what.
Tom, Spencer, what about you in terms of your conversations about the inclusion of consumption lounges and just kind of the process behind those
So
conversations?
we also, we took over a former Rite Aid drugstore. So we had a pretty big square footage. We have about 5,400 square feet, and we planned it from the beginning that we would have a lounge. It was in our town's ordinance that they would allow it, which in the end was not definitive. It was allowed, but then we went through a whole process, which we'll get to later on, I guess. But we basically cut the floor plan into thirds, and the front third is our lounge, the middle third is our sales floor, and the back third is our vault and administrative space. So it was definitely part of the plan from the beginning. Similar to John, we never really had a plan of how we're going to make money with it. I'd say that we still don't have a plan of how we're going to make money with it. There's a lot of stumbling blocks written into the regs that sort of prevent you from making money with it, or make it challenging. But we're happy to, we're not a tourist town. We're not like like the Atlantic City guys here, John and Spencer. We're more of a hometown base type of thing. So we're looking more as a community space, as a place where different organizations can meet and under happier circumstances than normal. Doing a lot of education type things. So more of a way of building loyalty versus somebody that's there for the night and give them a place to enjoy the cannabis. So we're more of a long-term play. We kind of describe ourselves as your best friend's finished basement. So that's kind of the feel that we have. We had this space built out from the beginning. It sat open as an empty room for a long time. Then we started watching for sales and watching for stuff on Facebook Marketplace and all that type of thing. And we just kind of built it up slowly instead of having to put out another $60,000 for furniture and whatnot. We kind of spread it out over that year. That we're waiting for things to happen. So in that way, it was kind of advantageous. That we're able to take our time and put a lot of thought into it and that type of thing. So we're happy with the results that we have at this point, and customers seem to appreciate it. So we're refining as we go and listening to feedback. But we think that we're off to a pretty good start so far.
Very insightful, Tom. And Spencer, you were brought in, and I know you've been waiting for this for a while. So what were those conversations when you were brought in, and is this kind of your baby, so to speak, in terms of consumption lounge?
Yeah, part of the reason that I came on full time with the Sunny Tien ownership was because of the lounge. I've been in the Jersey market for over 7 years. I started out when there were only 4 medical dispensaries in the entire state. So I've got to watch, first row and, inside all this growth we've experienced, which has been incredible. Jersey's still in its infancy in a lot of ways, but there's been an insurmountable amount of growth. And I like the challenge of cannabis. And looking at a consumption lounge is a challenge that really nobody nationwide has been able to perfect or really refine. There's barriers in all regulations in all states that doesn't allow us to copy and paste. So this was something that was going to be a challenge, which is fun, but at the same time, it allows me to explore different things and build something from the ground up. When I met the owners, they had the construction in the lounge done completely, similar to what John was saying. They build it out day one with that expectation that things would move along a little bit faster. So we sat here collecting dust, paying utilities and rent on this empty space. We also applied in July of last year, and we saw that portal open and said, all right, let's go. And unfortunately, it took, another 6 months for them to even launch the applications, and then took us over 3 months to get the approval. But in Atlantic City, people come here for the experiences, the beach, boardwalk, food, music, gambling, drinking. There's so much here to do, to immerse yourself in, and we thought that it was the perfect thing to offer that cannabis experience here. And so far, we're really seeing that. Most of the people that come into the lounge talk about how they're not really big drinkers. So when they want to go to the beach and they're spending the weekend at Tropicana, there's not too much for them to do outside of a handful of things, because they're not going clubbing, they're not sitting at the bar, they're not watching, the sports games and everything. But they'll be able to watch the Phillies games here or watch the Eagles games here and get a similar experience in Atlantic City, just without the alcohol and replacing it with cannabis, which they prefer. So we're really looking forward to, working with the commission to change some of these regulations and guidelines to allow us to do a little bit more and expand the business and really immerse cannabis into your typical lifestyle experiences that everybody already comes down here to get, to get a little share of.
I might be a little bit biased because I also live in South Jersey, but I hope you all are going to be showing the Eagles games this season. Go Birds, champions. I just have to just put it out there real quick. Just got to put it out there real quick. You talked about approval, Spencer. I'm gonna bring up this question a little bit higher. Can you talk a little bit about municipal approval in terms of getting the municipality to endorse the consumption lounge? You obviously needed it for your Class 5 retail. Consumption lounge and support from the municipality was one of the criteria. Spencer, I'll pass it back to you to start us off. What was that conversation like to get the approval?
Atlantic City was very open to it. The mayor had been very vocal when, back in, since February 2021, when the governor signed it through. And, Marty Small was saying that he wanted to make Atlantic City this cannabis destination for the East Coast. And consumption lounges is a vital component of that because, again, otherwise we're just a dispensary. There's over 260 of them in the entire state. What separates us from anybody else? We're just here for convenience for cannabis without the lounge. But with it, it creates a destination. I've said that, consumption lounge is either the cherry on top for people already coming here, or this is a deciding factor to get them to go, all right, let's head to Atlantic City. So the city was very supportive. They were, very, very easy to work with and very, encouraging for us to take on this, this new venture because it brings value to their municipality and their tourist ecosystem as a whole.
And John, because you're also in Atlantic City, would you also agree it was pretty easy to have those conversations too?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the lounge, they definitely were very open to. Yeah, I would say the barriers to entry for the retail in Atlantic City were probably way too low, frankly. I mean, they approved 63 endorsements in the city for 63 different dispensaries in a 25-block radius. So, yeah, getting the approval wasn't the challenge, frankly.
And Tom, what about you? Was that conversation pretty easy with your municipality?
I wouldn't call it easy. It was pretty challenging. It's a small town. It's a walkable town, very residential type of thing. We're about 15 minutes outside of Philadelphia, so historically this was like the town that people that were involved in business in Philadelphia. They would come out and build their weekend homes and vacation homes and stuff like that in Merchantville specifically. So it's kind of a genteel type of place. They want to maintain their reputation. So there are a lot of concerns, and we had to address those concerns one by one, and then all over again with the next person one by one, and it was several months before we locked in our municipal approval. So we started at the end of 24, and we got the approval, I'd say January of this year. So kind of right in time to submit it. But we had board meeting, city council meeting after city council meeting. We met with the board members or the councilmen individually and showed them the space and addressed their their concerns individually. A lot of them kind of had the same thing. You know, they were concerned about people leaving impaired and driving, and odor control. They didn't want a smokestack in the middle of their, in the middle of their nice houses and, their walking path and stuff like that. And, we went to I'd say great lengths, compared to the bar that's next to us and the bar that's going to be across the street from us. We have tons of restrictions and double checks and that type of thing that we took on just to get everybody except for one person on board with this. So it was a long process, and we had been involved in the town doing volunteer work. My wife and I had been there, and we worked at their food kitchen and all these different things, and we're part of all the activities. So we really worked hard to ingrain ourselves into the town as quickly as we could, and ultimately that brought us a lot of support from the residents. So I think that was critical.
Wow, you really had to go through an entire process. It's almost like you're getting another license.
It was. I mean, it's far more difficult than getting the dispensary there in the first place.
Wow,
Sure.
great insight. A lot of students are going to appreciate that too, that just because you get the retail doesn't automatically mean the municipality is going to sign off.
I mean, there's really very few municipalities that have it in their ordinance already to allow it. So that's really the first hurdle is, does the place where you're looking to set up, do they even allow it? And so if they don't allow it, now you have to change the ordinance if you want to do that. And that's we were trying to say your ordinance already allows it. What else? They say, well, we kind of had something different in mind when we said a consumption line. We were thinking more of like a restaurant, and people would go there and eat there and order infused food and stuff like that. It's like, well, it's kind of the opposite of that.
Well, that segues into a good question, and just in terms of where do you all see the future of consumption lounges heading? If, pie in the sky, if you could do anything in the consumption lounge, what would you do and what would you offer? And hey, listen, speaking into existence, Tom, we'll start with you.
It's a good question, and I could take an optimistic view, a pessimistic view. I could look at what's happened in other states and what's happened with big projects in New Jersey where they start off kind of good and get worse and worse as time goes on. So that's one path that this could take, and it could take. I mean, if we keep handing out licenses like crazy, it'll oversaturate the market, and it's the tragedy of the commons type of thing. So it could go that way. Hopefully not. I think we're on a better path than a lot of states are at this point. I think some of the regulations are a little conservative, but maybe they're viewing them as a starting point. Then we'll kind of open up the faucet as we go. We would like to be able to sell food in some format. I'm not saying that we're going to have a kitchen. We're not. But a bag of potato chips. I don't think that's really asking too much. It's not going to put the tavern that's next door to us out of business if we have packaged food that we could sell or sell sodas or something. We're allowed to give away food, and we do, but
that's debatable.
You can only support a business on giving away stuff for so long. So.
What about you, Spencer and John? Pie in the sky, what would you like your lounge to be able to provide, or what would you hope to be able to do in your lounge in the future?
So certainly non-alcoholic beverages would be a big one for us. Food would be another one for sure. Recently in our business plan, actually, which was approved by the state, we have the ability to sell souvenir cups and then fill them with soda. And if you read the regs really carefully, and it's disparate a little bit, the regs are pretty clear that you can't sell or serve food in any way. They do not say you can't serve beverage. They say you can't sell beverage. So we went in on that early on and thought that was a loophole that they put out there because, frankly, not to speak too strongly, but who in their right mind would smoke dabs, coughing their brains out without a drink? It just kind of makes sense. Food I get to a degree, but there's additional licensing with health department stuff you would need. But I agree with Tom. We don't really look to have a kitchen, but to be able to sell some packaged foods would be great, or finger foods. But the beverage part really is concerning. So to Tom's point, pessimistic, optimistic, we thought that going in, they wanted to be a little more conservative and open things up as they went. But we're actually finding, at least as of right now, it's the opposite. So they seem to be ratcheting down and tightening up as opposed to loosening up. So we're waiting to hear Wednesday. We're supposed to hear whether the souvenir cups are going to get nixed, which for us will be critical. We just ordered 150,000 of them. So, what when our app got approved. But coupled with that, we had some discussions around, well, how do they get the beverages then? Currently, the regs indicate you can have food delivered or you can bring it in yourself. Well, they're seemingly disallowing vendors to bring in food now as well as beverages, and potentially not allowing vendors in at all, which is again a little bit question. Like, it hasn't really been, part of this you have to expect there to be, we're sort of the guinea pigs, right? So we're trying things out. Regs could only, you can't possibly have every I dotted and T crossed to say what you kind of get do. So you generally have the spirit of the reg. But I think how a lot of us interpreted the spirit was just that they didn't disallow it yet, as opposed to, we kind of figured, okay, in the future, we probably would be able to have some limited food and some limited beverage. But what I was told last Friday was they may even get rid of the delivery ability to deliver food into the lounge. And in our consumption lounge in our cannabis bar, we built power outlets where we have kiosks mounted so you can order food there. So that it's sort of the risk of being an early pioneer, I guess. When you are in such a highly regulated business. But
This is
certainly,
good insight.
beverages would certainly, to me, be just, it make common sense. I did ask the question, why? Like, what's the basis for not wanting it? What's the basis for prohibiting it? And our investigator didn't really know the genesis or the details of the background. He did indicate that, well, food and cannabis don't necessarily go together. But then you got to look at the cafes in Amsterdam where, it's coffee shops, right? So I did a search just in AI and in Google, and apparently there is a differentiation on Google between a cannabis cafe and a cannabis lounge. So, maybe that's what they're going after. I don't really know. I mean, when we got into this, we kind of, I guess, interpreted the longer term vision to be a cafe, and really be able to sit down and be able to, because to the points I think we've all been making, what is the business model if it's not that?
Absolutely. Spencer, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both Tom and John on this stuff with the prepackaged food and beverage. It's essential not only for safety, but for the layers of hospitality, for the additional revenue stream, all of that. When you look at cannabis lounges, I'm often hesitant to compare cannabis to alcohol for a wide variety of reasons, but I like to think of it that we're one of the first bars to open in the 1930s post-prohibition. We've been through the ringer. We've had, lives have been destroyed because of this, and we're finally getting the opportunity to do something new, something that we know that the people want. So when you look at that, like John was just saying that they don't think that food and cannabis go together. Every time I'm smoking, I have, at least a water with me, and then, then I want a snack. I mean, the munchies are a thing for a reason. It's essential to incorporate as much of other lifestyle sectors into what we're doing, because it not only helps to destigmatize and fully immerse cannabis into the everyday life by allowing us to, eat food and drink, while we're consuming cannabis, but it also expands the business model and it makes it something healthy. When you watch shows like Bar Rescue, they talk all the time about how liquor sales are the money driver, but food keeps them there. The bars that don't sell food, they're just a hole in the wall that you go to tie one on at. There's not that full-fledged experience that makes that your local spot, makes that, somewhere that you want to go to celebrate for a birthday, a bachelorette party, whatever. So we really need to, allow cannabis to get that same overlap that we have with alcohol. How many times do you have parents at a kid's, sports game with, bottles of wine or, beers sitting in the cooler and nobody blinks an eye? So when we talk about the potential for lounges, we need to, in a lot of ways, replicate these bar models where people can sit at mine or John's bar, or grab a seat in Tom's lounge and watch the Eagles game and nobody blinks an eye at it, and they can get some wings and they can get, an iced tea with it. When we talk about what we're doing in the lounge, to be able to have live music, karaoke, trivia, all these basic things, there's so much that we can learn from what already works in having these communal spaces where people can go to consume an intoxicating substance. And when you look at the success model for that, us asking for prepackaged food and drink is like just scratching the surface on where we can really take this. I do envision cannabis lounges becoming similar to bars and restaurants where there's one on every corner, or they're heavily populated throughout the state, because I don't think a lot of people are going to want to see alcohol and cannabis be combined in the same space. Many people can't consume it because of federal regulations. Many people don't want to consume it. They don't like the smell, whatever, their justification is. We're going to need more lounges, and we're going to need to continue to expand that accessibility, especially for people that need it for, medicinal reasons. You may not be able to consume on your couch or on your property, and then you have to go sit in your car, which you shouldn't do. We need to create safe spaces where people can consume cannabis and balance that out with the fact that this is still a business. We need to create some form of revenue, or, at a minimum, break even off of this entire operation. And a bar would not be successful on the grand scale if there weren't other revenue streams and there weren't other layers to create a more hospitable space.
Last two questions, gentlemen. Do you think every dispensary should consider adding a consumption lounge to its premise, or do you think it's very situational? What should people think about if they're considering a consumption lounge as part of their overall business model? I'll pass that to Spencer first.
Yeah, so if I knew the right answer to this, I would be far richer than I currently am. But, I think that we'll probably see things split into two, where you're going to have some dispensaries operate a little bit more as a convenience store packaged goods, where it's designed for people to get in and get out, grab their stuff and move on. And then I think that you'll see more dispensaries that incorporate a lounge model once we refine, this business model and find a way to monetize it, successfully. And I think that's another parallel to alcohol. Sometimes you pop in, you grab the same six pack that you always grab, and you're going to like it and it's dependable and it's a 30-second transaction, or you're going for that experience. So I do think that you'll see that division. There's a number of variables that go into that. One, what your own funding and team capabilities are. Some people should not open lounges because in a lot of ways, this has been the hardest thing that I've done in my cannabis career. It's not easy there, again, because nobody has done it successfully in the US and any other state for you to be able to copy and paste that model, especially with state by state regulations. So for some people, know your capability, know your limitations. For other people, you have to look at the demographics and look at your geographical location. If we weren't in Atlantic City, would our business model work as well, even if we were just 10 minutes on the mainland? It might work better, or because Atlantic City sees 25 plus million people a year, we're in a big tourist trap. For some people in towns that have less than, 5,000 people population, again, if you're on Main Street the way that Tom is, with all the main communal hubs around you, it makes sense. Everybody's going to that general area, whether you're going to the bar, the consumption lounge, or you're just going to grab groceries. There's a draw there. But if you don't have that right setup, or your store isn't in that right area, it might be out of the way, it might be inconvenient, or the people in your town might just genuinely not want it. And it's really hard to get accurate data on cannabis consumers because nobody's doing, proper surveys. And how many people lie because they don't want to be written down as consuming a federally illegal product? So there's no right or wrong answer. I really think it's situational, but I think when you look at the potential long term for something like lounges, you're going to see those that go in 100% the way that we have, and you're going to see other stores that say, hey, we don't even want to touch it. We're just your quick, convenient dispensary to grab what you need and go.
Tom, John, is there anything that you would like to add in terms of, do you think consumption lounges are for every dispensary, or it depends?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a micro license, you're pretty much out of it, because you have the staffing restrictions and the square footage restrictions. So, you're not gonna be able to get a property that's big enough to physically contain a decent sized lounge, because you need a critical mass. You can't have a lounge that seats 4 people. So
Those are the most loyal. Those are the most loyal customers, are they not, Tom?
Yeah, that's true. It's
2 of them being the owners, probably.
right, exactly. So, Yeah, and you're going to have to commit to staffing it. You can't just have a room and say, okay, go ahead, do whatever you want in there. You have to. We have somebody that's assigned to the room, to keep an eye, to control people coming and going, and we have to administer like kind of a sobriety test or a test of impairment if you're driving yourself. So we have somebody that administers that test. That's an app-based type of thing called Druid that measures your impairment. So you have to have somebody that does that. And like Spencer says, we're 15 minutes outside Philadelphia. We live in we are in a town that's less than 5,000 people, but it's right in the midst of 150,000 people, right? That reside in that area within a couple miles. So we're in a very densely populated area. If I was, in Cumberland County or Salem County or something, I would, definitely give that another thought. It's a pretty big responsibility. You have a liability. We just got insurance, but we were only able to get $300,000 worth of insurance. That's the most that they'll write for the liability. And if we were a bar, we'd be able to get $1 million of insurance. So there's responsibility. So you have to commit to it. You have to have a staff that supports it, and that's going to be good hosts and good. If we run events, we're going to need people that are going to cruise direct those events.
Right.
That run the bingo game or run the trivia night, right? So if you don't have that, that's gonna be tough. So. I would say, and if you're in if the town doesn't have it in the ordinance, that's going to be a long road to hoe. It's going to be a tough one. So,
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought up the ordinance too, because if it's not in the ordinance, then you're already back at square one in that regards too.
Yeah,
So
then you have to get the ordinance changed, and that's if it's not in the ordinance, maybe they just didn't think of it, but a lot of times if it's not in the ordinance, it's not in the ordinance for a reason. You have to overcome that reason.
Good insight. John, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I agree with both Spencer and Tom. I mean, I think some stores really are better designed to be transactional. Size has a lot to do with it. The other side of it too is so on the consumer end of it, what is it they're after when they visit that store? Is it hospitality or is it get the product, get in, get out? The other side is the reality around cost, because like Spencer was saying earlier, it's the bars don't just make money by selling alcohol. Some do, but that's sort of the rare scenario. So does it justify the rent you have to pay if you're paying rent? And in our case, I can tell you it's a large dollar sum. Our store's 10,000 square feet. The lounge is about 3,200, which is bigger than many stores out there, just the lounge. So, if you're in a 1,500 square foot store, I would say, yeah, it's where you're going to put it, right? You got to have enough vault space, and then you've got all the staffing issues, the cleaning up, the glassware you have to keep in inventory. It's quite the process. So I would say, yeah, it's not for everybody, but I think that there certainly will be far more than 4 in New Jersey. I would expect probably half the stores at some point will have them.
Appreciate your time, gentlemen. The last question will be just more for people who eventually watch this recording. Words of wisdom for someone who wants to enter the cannabis space and maybe apply to be an operator, whether they want to get a retail license or maybe get a retail license and add a consumption lounge to it. Any words of wisdom for those that are about to possibly embark on the journey that you are continuously a part of? John, I'll start it with you.
Yeah, I hear Germany is an excellent market right now. So, yeah, I mean, to Tom's point earlier, Jersey, I hate to say this, but the ship sailed, in my opinion. I mean, we're already oversaturated in the state with dispensaries, certainly with suppliers. There are regions that don't have them. So as those kind of open up, there might be, good reason to have more, but we're just seeing a lot of over competition, I'd say. And I think it's important to be an early market mover in any market you're going to get into, in cannabis specifically. So there are some other markets that are coming about, and there's certainly, I'm sure there's still a number of opportunities in Jersey, but they're far fewer, further and farther between than they were before. And it's not for the faint-hearted. That's for sure.
Absolutely. 70% of municipalities are still opted out. And so
Mhm.
we desperately need people on the ground game to get those municipalities to also open up. But it's going to be a battle, and we certainly are hearing about it too on our end
Just,
too.
just don't push Cherry Hill or Moorestown too hard on open. We're fine with.
Hey, I'm trying to bring people to Sicklerville. This is my hometown. Hold up, hold up.
But it's interesting, John, I don't mean to interrupt, but that point is very valid. 70% have opted out. However, what happens is the ones right around it end up overpopulating. So Jersey City has a ton, Atlantic City has far over what can be sustained by the market, even with the tourists. So, it's sort of the balancing act that I think people have to be aware of.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Tom, Spencer, any other words of
I mean,
wisdom?
I would say if you're thinking about applying for a license, first find property that you could secure and that the town is going to welcome you, and if you can't do that, you might as well not even apply, right? And then find out where you're going to get your $1 or $2 from. It's kind of another stumbling block that you can't go to the bank, you can't put on a credit card, really, so you have to find somebody like a physical person or a group or something that's gonna loan you the money and make sure the terms are not as atrocious as a lot of these terms are.
Oh, absolutely. Read the
So
contract. Read the contract.
and yeah, I mean there's a lot of blood in some of those contracts, so you have to keep an eye for that. I personally, if I was to get in it again, I would wait for somebody to go out of business and buy buy a pre-established business. There's two that have gone out of business already. So somebody bought those two, and they're all licensed and situated and built out. I mean, if you haven't run a construction project, then it's not you ever see the movie Money Pit? It's that's what it's like.
And
So
not everyone's Bob the Builder, unfortunately.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, unless you have a Bob the Builder on your
yeah,
team, to which
right,
that's already
right.
a leg up.
Yeah, so buying a place that's already set up and the management failed or whatever, whatever the reason might be, and you think you could do a better job, that's probably a lot better. It's buying a used car instead of a new car, so you're getting that
I like
discount,
that analogy. I like that.
broken in a
Spence.
little bit, right?
Yeah, so, in addition to what John and Tom both said, which are, wildly valid points, if you're looking to get involved, you need to make sure that you are building a strategy from day one. This industry, this sector, especially the Jersey market, is not for the weak. It's not for everybody, which is okay, but if you want to get involved, you really have to, build a strategy from day one and understand what you want to do, and most importantly, why. If you want to get into opening a consumption lounge, whether it's part of your business plan from day one or you're going to open the dispensary and expand, you really need to look to see, is there the need for this? If I do build this, what roadblocks and hurdles am I going to have in my way? And what will that cost? How long will that take? And, as you build this out, you want to make sure you're offering something for, your demographic of people. If you're in a town that's heavily 55 and up, it's going to be very different than being in a big tourist area or in a heavily commercialized area like, Cherry Hill. You really need to understand all the variables and all the different dynamics that go into this. Otherwise, you're going to sink, what could have been 2 million will quickly turn into 3, and you're not going to make your money back off that. Everything needs to be done with intention. You have to strategize every step of the way, and you have to be prepared for setbacks and for failure. If you're not able to pull yourself back up, learn from your mistakes, accept the things you can't control, and keep trudging forward, you're not going to be here. But there's a reason that myself, Tom, and John are where we are, especially for somebody like John and I in a mile and a half town with 16 dispensaries, which will soon be 17, 18. Tom's in an area where he's got 30 dispensaries within a 20-minute drive of him. It's a very, very difficult place to not only find just basic success and stability, but to be able to thrive from that. In a lot of ways, it allows the three of us to differentiate. John and I have a very, very different opportunity than the other 14 guys in town, as does Tom with all of his neighbors. But being the only one also comes with its own challenges. So you really just have to batten down the hatches. And if this is what you want to do, you have to commit, but you got to be smart about it. Otherwise, you're going to blow your money or somebody else's and have nothing to show for but a failure. And it's a shame. We have seen some dispensaries close, one of which had a lounge in their business model from one day. They had, a big celebrity name behind them in a massive town with a population of, over a 250,000 people. And they made it 6 months and the lounge didn't even get open. So you really, really have to take a look at the market dynamics to make sure, is this even the right move before you spend a penny or an ounce of your effort on that decision.
Spencer, Tom, John, Consumption Lounge pioneers, thank you for being at the forefront. Thank you for going through a lot of the fire and a lot of the hurdles for many to kind of learn from. And really wishing you all the best of success as we continue to see this market mature and expand. And hopefully you all are able to get what you want in terms of your ideas too. So I appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, G.